Oh, if only this deal had held. In Paris in August of 1928, as seen in this old shaky newsreel, a multinational treaty authored by French Foreign Minister Aristide Briand and the U.S. Secretary of State Frank Kellogg outlawed war. I-24 News spoke with Ona Hathaway, co-author of The Internationalists, a book about that almost forgotten treaty. When it comes to current-day crises, we're trying to explore whether it's legal to make war or even threaten war. I mean, we're talking about the United States and North Korea. North Korea's foreign minister said this week that President Trump has already declared war, so North Korea feels that it could shoot down an American military aircraft even if it weren't over North Korean territory. Is that legal? Can we start there and not talk immediately about this piece of history that you're writing about, but talk about the headlines? I mean, who's right? What's legal? North Korea says President Trump already declared war. Do you see that?
No, I don't. While the president has been speaking in ways that are irresponsible and the rhetoric is certainly escalatory, he has not, in fact, declared war by tweet or otherwise. It takes actions to do that, and he hasn't yet acted. So there are two basic reasons that modern states can go to war. One is if they're being attacked or an attack is imminent, they can defend themselves. The other is if the Security Council authorizes a use of military force, then a state can act consistent with the Security Council authorization. Those are basically the only two reasons that in the modern era states can use military force against one another.
Well, if we go back to history, and your book, The Internationalists, is focused on an agreement. It's often called the Paris Pact of August 1928, in which France, the United States, 13 other nations, and eventually, I think it's 47 more nations, all agreed that war is illegal. I mean, tell me the background. 1928, just 11 years after the end of what became known as the First World War. I guess the world was kind of in a post-traumatic shock.
That's right. I mean, the world had suffered enormous destruction, and there was a desire to find a way to stop war from happening again. There was this movement to try and outlaw war that led to the Paris Peace Pact in 1928.
Germany signed that agreement in 1928. Yet 5 years later, you have the rise of Adolf Hitler, and the war starts by the end of the 1930s. So the treaty, you know, it wasn't realistic. It's the product of dreamers, no?
It is the product of dreamers, but sometimes it takes dreamers to come up with a great idea. And while it didn't initially work, it set a process in motion that led to the commitments that we have today in the United Nations Charter.
You mentioned that self-defense is an acceptable reason to go to war. And so even between, say, the U.S. and North Korea, either side might claim self-defense after almost any incident.
Well, it's not enough to simply make the assertion that one has a right to engage in self-defense. We're in a moment that's very dangerous because Trump's rhetoric does create an impression that the United States is prepared to use military force.
Well, obviously you're criticizing President Trump, but it must be his calculation or his gut instinct by making it sound like he would use military force if the U.S. or its allies are attacked. That could be a legitimate reason to go to war.
If, in fact, the United States or its allies were attacked, that would be a legitimate reason to use military force in response. Yes, that's right. What makes many people nervous is the way in which he seems to be throwing around rhetoric a little bit more carelessly than that. And that to the extent that he's doing so, it's creating the impression that maybe he's willing to use force in other situations as well. And that's irresponsible. That does put us at risk of again, a miscalculation on either side. And so to the extent that that's what he's doing, that is quite dangerous.
That's Professor Ona Hathaway at Yale Law School, co-author of a book called The Internationalists: How a Radical Plan to Outlaw War Remade the World. Or did it? Ona Hathaway, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.